Hi there, it's September the 15th. We're continuing our journey through Paul's letter to the Galatians, and we are in chapter 2, reading verses 1 to 16. So it becomes clear from this passage that we're reading that the issue here seems to be one of circumcision, male circumcision, and male circumcision, that is the removal of the tip, the foreskin from the penis of the male, was something that was known widely because it was practiced by the Jews, and it had been practiced since the time of Abraham. It was a sign given to Abraham of the covenant, and therefore it was something that was a real issue for the Jews. But actually, circumcision is something that is widely practiced in many nations, among many cultures of the world. Sometimes it's seen as a health benefit, as a medical benefit, so it's not just a religious benefit. So there were many who were arguing that in order to be truly followers of Messiah, there had to also be this operation done for males who came into the faith of following Jesus, because after all, this was a Jewish tradition, this was a Jewish this was a Jewish belief, and therefore they should be following the ways of the Jews. But Paul is saying, no, that's not so. And now remember, he's establishing the integrity of his own apostolate here. He's saying that he's not having to live under the direction of the Jerusalem apostles. In fact, he says it was 14 years before he actually came and had counsel with the Jerusalem apostles. This would have been a time when he'd been away in Arabia, or a time in some of his time in Tarsus, where he came from. But it's a long time of training, of preparation before he came to Antioch. So he came to Jerusalem to confer with the Jerusalem apostles there, as he says, to make sure that we were singing from the same hymn sheet, really, and to make sure he wasn't running in vain. This shows Paul's openness to be in team, to be in connection. He's not wanting to live solo, but he is also saying, I'm not gaining my authority. I haven't got some authority from the Jerusalem apostles and have to look to them. And in fact, he says when he came to Jerusalem, he came with Titus, and Titus was not forced to be circumcised, even though he was a Gentile, although there were those who were really pushing for this to happen. But Paul didn't yield any authority to them. He didn't give way to their so-called authority. And in fact, rather than that, those who were in authority, Peter, James, John, actually welcomed Paul and gave him the right hand of fellowship, they connected with him, they agreed with him, and also they recognized that he was the one who had been given the gospel to the nations. Now it's interesting here again, our translators spare our blushes somewhat when they translate, but Paul, in the Greek it says that Paul is given the gospel to evangelion tis sacrovistias. Now literally that means he is given the gospel of the foreskin. This is not a negative sort of something saying these people are not the same because they've not been circumcised. This is actually endorsing the fact that there are people who have not gone through circumcision, males who still have their foreskin, who are able to come before God and be accepted and to worship. And so Paul is not afraid to call his gospel to evangelion tis sacrovistias, the gospel of the foreskin. And this is endorsed by the Jerusalem apostles. And so there is this seeming settlement in Paul's heart that there is not a requirement on non-Jews to be circumcised. Then there's another issue that arises when Peter comes to Antioch and he comes and visits the church in Antioch. He separates himself from the non-Jews to eat at table. This was another Jewish tradition. Jews sat down separately from non-Jews so that they kept their table holy, as it were, and pure. And Paul was incensed by this because it says this is hypocrisy. You're expecting people to live under the Jewish tradition. You're expecting people to live in Jewish ways, and yet you yourselves are not able to fulfill them. And this is one of Paul's big messages here in Galatians, that by keeping the laws of Moses, by keeping the Mosaic traditions, no one can be justified by God. No one will receive right standing before God just by doing stuff. And so it says he faced Paul up Paul faced Peter up face to face with his action. And this happened when, interestingly, when people from James came, when James the brother of Jesus, was the leader of the church in Jerusalem at this time. And when they arrived, Peter acted differently than he had been acting. This is what Paul is so upset about, that Peter was acting one way when he first came, but then when the men from James came, he acted another way and separated himself and ate with them instead of eating with everyone as he had been. So it's very important that we see here that Paul is homing in on this issue of not trying to please God through doing stuff according to our tradition. In fact, he says it's only by faith in Jesus Messiah that we can receive justification from God. It's only by trust in what he has done, not trust in what we do, that we will be set free. This is the key thing that Paul is saying throughout Galatians. And Paul is very clear to stick to this in this interface that he describes with Jesus' main friend, main apostle here, with Peter. And this changes the whole tenor of the future, as it were, in relationship between Jews and non-Jews. We need to be always constantly aware of God's open arms, God's open heart embrace around all those who we come across. God has created everyone in his image. There is no separation, there's no difference. We all matter equally to God. So let's not put our traditions, let's not put our cultures on others to try and make them conform, but let's recognize that through faith in Jesus Messiah, we are made one in the same body. Have a very good September 15th.